Okay, welcome to Alternative Hypothesis Streams. No preparation for this one. I got on somebody that a lot of people have seen in a debate with Mike Enoch and Nick Fuentes, Halsey English, and we are going to talk about the functionality of multiracial societies. And there's a little bit of a disagreement. Halsey says he's been sort of watching a lot of my stuff, and he thinks it's interesting, but he has some disagreements regarding the superiority of homogenous political entities versus multiracial political entities. So do you want to go ahead and go off with that? Or?
Sure. I mean, what I'm curious to hear you talk about is that I'm not a fan of multiculturalism myself on a macro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But at the same time, when you look at societies like the United States, right? I mean, we have less of a white population or less of a homogenous population than Europe. But yet crime rates in America, I mean, amongst interracial groups might be high amongst like blacks or sometimes Latinos. But on the whole, crime has generally dropped the less homogenous our society has become. And when you look at societies that are
I don't know if that is true. I think that is true over. I know that's true over a certain time frame. I don't know if the United States is less criminal than it was, say, in 1800 or something. But
I don't know. I'm not going back that far either. I'm looking at that crime has been dropping over let's say the last 50 years. The crime rate has consistently gone down, while the level of white monopoly has consistently gone down as well.
Okay. One thing I would say about that, I actually don't care a whole lot about crime per se. There's a lot of people in, I guess, what you would call the alt-right. I personally am ambiguous about the term alt-right. It's funny. People talk about the alt-right a lot. And apparently I'm like really, not only am I in it, I'm supposedly like one of like the founding stock of it. But the hell of it is, I don't even see, I'm like, I can like talk to Richard Spencer, semi-regular. Mike Enoch, I can talk to all the time. Like, I know all these people personally. I was there, before they even took on the label alt-right. So like, I know all these people like very one-on-one sort of way. And I'll tell you what, I don't know what the alt-right is. And so I'm saying if I don't know what the alt-right is, like none of these people writing about it know what it is, right? I mean, if I of all people don't know what it is, then so.
Well, it's funny because I hang out in.
But I lost track of your question. I'm sorry, I'm kind of scatterbrained here.
Well, I was actually, I didn't get to a question yet, but what kind of confused me, or at least I'd like to hear you expand on, is that you look at things like crime rate, you look at things like integration, you look at
let me finish my point. I just remembered my point. Let me finish it before I forget it again. So I would say, like, I don't really much care about criminality insofar, except at that criminality is going to be sort of a reflection of the general character of a population. Did you watch my video or read the article on the European Revolution?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So you know what I mean when I say like crime rate. I don't really particularly care about like homicide went down, whatever. But I think that's interesting insofar as it's a reflection of the character of those people, and that's going to affect like literally everything. I'm thinking about just like micro stuff. For example, in Florida, there was recently, just one-off example. There was a bridge that was built by it was like an all-female leadership firm, and there was like not a single white person, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they designed a bridge without a center support.
Yeah,
right, across the median. So, and I would say that's like, and the thing is, that's something that it's kind of like when dealing with the roads in anarcho-capitalism, because like it's pretty easy to come up with like solutions for like the main highways, but then you start getting into what I call the capillary roads, and that's something that's really hard to explain and quantify. Now, with the roads in anarcho-capitalism, the capillary roads are pretty easy to deal with. Neighborhoods have free access roads. Free rider problem is not a problem with those kind of roads, but whatever. But one thing about a multiracial society is that you get a lot of these what I think of as capillary issues, that are issues that that you can't really put a number on it. You can't say, oh, the crime rate is whatever. It's more like it's a million and one little things that you can't really put a hat on. And the only way you can sort of infer its existence is based on sort of the movement and sort of the behavior and the feelings of people, right? The lower social trust, white flight. It's sort of like inferring the existence of, you have to sort of infer the existence of a problem, kind of like you infer the mass of a star that doesn't emit any light, that sort of thing.
No, I get it. It's just what a lot of my expertise is in political systems and geopolitics. And I look at kind of more truly homogenous societies like China, like Japan, like Latin America. I mean, Latin America is a little bit less of an example, but you look at even Africa, where the populations are homogenous. And if you say that it's an IQ issue, you'd say, okay, well, Africa has or the Middle East has a lower IQ, but Asia has a higher IQ, and yet the ability of people to literally slaughter their countrymen without seeming to have any type of guilt over it is at a very high level. They don't seem to have even the respect for the humanity of their fellow, countrymen
China,
or their race.
In China or in Africa?
Or it generally seems to play out in most places. And if not, they tend to be very expansionist, whereas they might not care about their own people. Like they might care about their own people to some extent, but they expand out into other areas and commit, like Japan being an example, that when they invaded China, they brutally slaughtered, hundreds of thousands of people.
Right. I would also say one issue with Japan is that Japan actually had a racial ideology, and this is something that I talk about a lot, which is that you should not have a race ideology. You should have, like the way. Basically, like what is called the race realist view on race. This is the view on race that you have if you're kind of like a naively looking at the world is a view you would sort of default to. And it's also the view that anthropologists will come to in the absence of any ideological push. In Nazi Germany, for whatever reasons, there's a guy, Sean Lass, who actually knows a lot more about the rise of Aryanism in Nazi Germany, but the short course is that there are two sort of competing theories in Nazi Germany about the Aryan theory. One was the magical mystical island of Hyperborea, which is somewhere between Iceland and Denmark, where the Aryans came in, and as a result, these Aryans then filtered out from northwestern Europe and then down south and east, which is why you would have more Aryan strain in Scandinavian and Scottish people and less as you went through down. So actually the Germans would not be the most Aryan according to this. And so what Hitler did, and so there's a lot of confusion about Nazi racial thinking, because it's like, well, wait a minute. So you say there's, blonde hair and blue eyes correspond with an Aryan strain, but then Russians have a higher incidence of blonde hair and blue eyes than Norwegians or Scots. But the thing is, that doesn't matter, because according to this theory, the Aryan strain didn't end up in Russia. It ended up sort of in Northwest Europe and in various isolated pockets around the rest of the world. And also in one of those pockets was believed to be Japan, that they were supposed to have a higher Aryan strain. So Nazi racial thinking was a product of kind of a race ideology, right? And you even had, and what was amazing is, this is something a lot of people don't know, is that American, French, and British anthropologists actually held conferences specifically to denounce German racial thinking and get it removed from Western universities. It wasn't making any headway anyway, but there was a lot of talk about that. And so I would say that's a long way of saying, yes, you have these sort of a homogenous, or at least perceived to be homogenous. That's really what matters. They perceive themselves to be homogenous, and that creates the possibility of a kind of racial ideology. I don't know exactly as much of what the Japanese thought about race, but it ended up having a similar effect to German racial thinking. So,
but also when you look at I won't put words in your mouth, but when you look at the theories espoused by some of the people that we've spoken about, there seems to be a general coalescence around Europeanism, that European whites have a tendency to coalesce as a society, that they tend to be able to build as a society, and that separated and put into their own devices, they would be able to create almost a level of like utopia, not of course a perfect utopia.
I
But
would say, well, I would disagree. I would say that, like, they would, like, I just point to, Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, minus the effects of the brown people in Sweden. I just point like that's what it is. It's not utopia, but it's
it's not bad. We can
it's
we can
nice.
agree it's not
Right.
bad.
Right.
But when you look at America, we have a complete mixture of European ancestry. So defining whiteness per se is not the easiest thing to do. You know
I
what
would
I'm
say it's a
saying?
very. I think it's a very easy thing to do.
Why would you say that? Because I'm not pulling one of those. Well, what is white? Is Samuel L. Jackson white?
What exactly? I can't. I have no idea what is. Okay. I would say. Well, the thing is, like, there's two. Like, here's why it's kind of silly, because you could either go with sort of the eyeball test,
Right.
and with an eyeball test, that's about. Okay, there's something known as k-means genetic clustering, where basically what you do is you give a program a bunch of genetic data from a bunch of people, and you tell, and there's all sorts of parameters by which you can do this, and you tell it, sort this genetic data into 3 clusters, sort it into 9 clusters, sort it into whatever, however many clusters. Thing is, if you choose between 7 and 9 clusters for the whole world, you end up with the races. Okay, the races as basically were defined in 1870, and so the best fit genetic clusters do correspond to the colloquial notions of race. Also, there's plenty of cluster analysis studies where they take a look at someone's self-reported ancestry and compare that to their best fit genetic cluster. And in the United States, with whites, it's like over 99% accurate, like all the time. Like, it's almost always correct. And I have a suspicion that if you had an expert panel of people, like other people, doing the eyeball test of people and seeing how well that corresponded to best fit cluster, it would be like over 99.9%. I think that
I could totally believe that.
I think that sort of the discontinuity comes from, like, clearly white people saying, I'm Arab or something stupid. There's people who say stupid stuff like that. It's
right.
Like, no, we're gonna just, like, there's clearly what you are. So in a sense, it's like, what is white? Honestly, like 99% of the time, in practice, it's whoever says they're white today. Now, if you started to use that as like a standard for citizenship or something, you could run into problems where you have a bunch of Somalis coming in saying, I'm white, So
yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, all right, but today, right now, who is white? It's basically any people who say they're white. 99% of the time, that works. And sort of the dispute regarding the genetic cluster. And if you want to get like more particular, you could say the best fit genetic cluster that corresponds to Europeans when the number of groups is set to 7, 8, or 9. Right.
But when I look at European history is a good example, right? Is that right. I know that a lot of people don't put a lot of stock in philosophy, that people of a similar philosophy are in theory supposed to be able to get along better, and people of a disparate philosophy are going to go to war more often, right? But when you look at the history of Europe, let's say, the European states that were under the control of the Catholic Church were a constant states of war. It was almost like a constant purity spiral, where they were always, who was the best Catholic, who was in the best graces of the Pope, whose king was the best king for the Catholic Church, things like that. But then you look at a place like America, where you had all of these outside groups. Now, they all didn't believe the same thing. There were Quakers, there were Puritans, there were Protestants, there were all kinds of different. There were Jews, there were all different kinds of white Europeans, but they're grouping as outsiders and wanting to be kind of left alone from mainstream thinking seemed to come about to create not only a more peaceful society, but a more coherent society, more society that could agree on the rules and agree to basically leave each other alone if given the opportunity. Whereas Europe doesn't seem to have that ability.
Yeah, there's a few things I would say about that. The first thing I would say is regarding wars, when you go back to like 1000 AD, for example, maybe put a little bit of the asterisk next to wars, because in people's mind, their sort of view of what war is very different from what it was then. Like when we think of a war, we think of like total war.
Right.
That's what most people think of. Back then, it's like they had all these wars, but it was kind of like it's kind of like saying the United States has been at war for the past 70 of the past 100 years, or I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like that. And so it's like, yeah, sure, technically, but
Kind of.
and, you know, it's kind of like it's not like the peasants were being taken off their farms and mobilized into
Right.
mass. It's like a few nobles having, you know. In fact, I've seen it's funny actually. I've seen like some like there are like wars between like lords, and it was like five guys on either side. I mean, that's obviously an extreme case, but it's put a little
Oh
bit.
no, it's actually prevalent. It's not an extreme case. It was very prevalent amongst noble lords going hundreds of years back.
To,
You
to,
know,
have,
where
to have like very small like
it was
bands.
almost like a chess match. Like they would move their soldiers into position. It would be fought very civilly, and then at the end, just whoever was left standing was kind of declared the winner, and they moved on.
Right. Which was probably kind of like an evolutionary strategy like animals have of like sort of having a fight that isn't super fatal. Like in this
Mhm.
case, it's between societies where a few guys die, but you don't have the kind of destruct. But anyway, what we were talking about. One thing I would say regarding the rise of, you know, Europeans having more wars than the United States. Um, Part of that I think has to do, like, this is just me sort of thinking out loud here.
Sure.
Has to do with a scaling effect of a society. For example, if you're starting a society, like, how do I put this? If you're, say, like in the middle of, I don't know, Bavaria or something, and you have a little kingdom, at the
Hmm.
beginning, you know, you make arrangements with the people around you and you don't have much of an issue. But as your society gets bigger and bigger and bigger, a lot of the arrangements start to no longer work as things sort of scale up, and it becomes a different economy, different, like I can't really give you a whole lot of specifics here what I'm thinking because I'm sort of thinking out loud. However, once you go into the Americas, you have kind of a clean slate to
Hmm.
where you can sort of design a society from the outset to encompass the realities of, you know, civilization circa 1770, right?
Okay.
As opposed to systems that were designed for 1000 AD and now are kind of chafing at each other as you get into later and later times, and it becomes very painful to reform government in Europe, whereas those sorts of reforms didn't have to happen in the United States or even a country like Mexico or Brazil. I mean, they sort of did. They had to get their independence from European countries, but other than that, they sort of had the advantage of not having a lot of legacy uh, political structures. That's sort of how I view that.
So what it brings me to my actual main question, because this is really what I wanted to hear you expand on. As I said, I'm not a fan of multiculturalism anyway.
Right.
I actually think that ethno-nationalism has a real place in political thought.
Right.
But when I talk to people, it was funny that you said it's very hard to define the alt-right, right?
Mhm.
I look at that. There's basically two schools of thought. There's a school of
Well,
thought
here's
that defines enemies,
okay.
right? And there's a school of thought that defines peoplehood.
Mhm.
Okay, like they'll say, okay, I'm for a white ethno state, or I'm for the white race, or I'm for white pride, or whatever you want to call it. And there's
Sure.
those that say I'm against immigration, or I'm against Jews, or I'm against this,
Mhm.
right? So in order for ethno nationalism to have a place in somewhere like America or Europe, one just has to open their eyes to see nobody's happy right now. If you look at all of the different races that are mixed into Europe or America, no one will tell you that they've got the best end of it right now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? White people will say they don't
Well,
have the best end of it. Black people will say it. Muslims will mostly say it. Like most people, more people are defined by their victimhood than they are by their pride levels.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So how
Um,
how can that affect a society in terms of how can ethno nationalism have a place right now? I'm not talking. We talked about whether it be will it be or as it is. You know, as it is right now, how does ethno nationalism have a place where it can be built on, it can be built peacefully, and it can be built in a way that is best for as many people as possible?
so, well, okay. When you say right now, I like right now, like the best expression of white nationalism I would say, is Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, right?
Would you lump Israel in with those categories, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, kind of. The thing about like Jews I mean, Jews definitely genetically cluster with whites. You look at Jews, they're definitely white looking. But I would say Jews are they're more different from any other European group uh in terms of their behavior and
Mm-hmm.
their than any other group is from each other. Like I would say, for example, a Spaniard, like the most distance you could probably get would be, a Spaniard compared to a an Icelander. That's probably like the most distant behavioral gap you would have within whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it would be something like some someone from like the Volga, Volgograd and Iceland. That may be a bigger, it's something like that. But I would say Jews are bigger. Or there's a bigger gap between Jews and the rest of Europeans than any of those.
Okay, I can
So
accept that.
so I mean, are they white? Yes, I would say yes. They're white, but they're very distinct. I would
Mm-hmm.
say that's
Oh, for
that's
sure. I mean,
that's
I
my honest opinion
honestly,
on that.
I don't spend enough time like really thinking about it. For the purposes of argument, most of the time, I say it's just simpler to say I'm not white because I would be considered other by most people I'm talking to. So it's not an eyeball test thing. It's more of just a
Well, the funny thing about that with the eyeball tests, like if you looked at any one Jewish person, you would say, you mean you could easily say Jewish, not Jewish. But I think if you took like 1,000 Jews and compared them to like 1,000 non-Jews, you could easily say, oh, this is the Jewish population
well,
versus.
I'm also a hard one to use the eyeball test on. My father, I look just like my father, and my father's white. So my
Okay.
father isn't Jewish.
Okay.
So and I look just like him. So any type of physical trait that I would identify
Yeah,
with
but there, but
Judaism
there, but
doesn't
there's,
apply
but
to me.
there's a lot of people who have not a drop of Jewish blood, and you look at their face, it's like, oh, that person looks very Jewish, right? So,
One of my
you,
writers is
you,
like that. He says it all the time. He has to explain to people he's not
you
Jewish.
got exceptions like that all the time. I'm just saying, like if you took sort of a large population, you could tell which one, and you could do the same thing with Turks. There's a lot of Turks you could look at and you could say, oh, this Turk is actually a Frenchman or something. But if you
Mm-hmm.
took 1,000 Turks and compared it to 1,000 like real Frenchmen, not the black French, quote unquote, which I don't. But you could sort of see the difference there. I
Yeah,
think.
for sure.
Actually.
But
Uh,
that was why I was curious because obviously I don't believe that plans that say deport anybody who's not white and take over America are feasible or even realistic
no,
in
no,
a 50-year
and
term.
in fact, I have been that is something that I have been annoyed with to no end on this matter is what I call the Americultists, uh, and I've and it's just like people who say like I was listening to TRS Mania. And there's like a guy coming in saying, "Oh, we're not going to give up 1 inch of America. This is our country. This is all." It's like, okay, so you're not dealing with reality. You're not dealing with real politics as well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I think I would say, and this is something that when I actually talk about, no, okay, so to answer your question, sort of like the immediate expression of white nationalism, that would basically be Eastern Europe. So if you want
Mm-hmm.
to have like a white nationalist state today, right now, go to East, try to get naturalized or be allowed to be a permanent resident, if not a citizen, in one of what is called the Visegrad group, which is
Mm-hmm.
Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Czech Republic. That's basically what is now functionally kind of sort of a white ethno state. It's not really a white ethno state because they're very proud of being Polish, very proud
Yeah.
of being Hungarian. So it's not quite sort of like the pan-European nationalism that I actually like. And I actually agree. I'm actually sort of in line with Richard Spencer on this one thing, in that I'm a fan of sort of a pan-European coalition, one which does in fact, and this is where I differ with Richard Spencer, one which does include Jews that want to be on board. One issue I have with Jews, I look at, for example, the voting in the
Mm-hmm.
2016 election. Jews basically voted the same way as Hispanics did.
Right.
about like of the vote between the two candidates, it was like 30 something plus percent pro Trump. Now, one thing I will say is that younger Jews are actually more. I don't know if I don't want to use the term right wing or conservative, but I will say they were more Trumpist at the least. And the same thing is actually also true with obviously non-Jewish whites. Like I don't know if you've seen those high school polls, but basically among like white high schoolers, Trump so basically the Republican Party is going to be competitive well into whites being a minority, if this data is meaningful. But
I also found it interesting in the data that of that 36% that support Trump, they're the strongest Trump supporters of any group measurable.
Yeah, that may be a reflection of. Well, actually, maybe. Okay, here's what I was going to say. I was going to say maybe that's sort of a reflection of kind of pruning down to the hardcore, because I think sort of like within. I don't want to use the term Jewish community because I'm not sure how much that actually exists, but among Jews, you may have like the ones that are Trump supporters have to be really fervent about it because there's so much pressure the other way. But then I'm thinking, I don't know if that's even how true that is. And also, what about, shouldn't black Trump supporters be the most hardcore given the amount of pressure that's on them? But
black Trump supporters I find to be very moderate. And it's not that they say, well, I begrudgingly support Trump, but Hispanic supporters of Trump I find to be like diehard. Like, I mean, they're more hardcore on illegal immigration than I am, and that's pretty hardcore, So, and it's weird because you would think it's a Hispanic issue the way the Democratic Party frames it, and these people are like, no, put them in a cannon, shoot them over the border.
No, you know what I think it is among Hispanics who are anti. I think it's because they are Hispanic, they don't feel the same kind of restraint that you or I would have, because for us it's like, well, I'm not them, so I'm so it's sort of like correcting for your own bias. However, if you are Hispanic and you're saying to deport Hispanics, you have no, that guilt sort of thing doesn't really work on you, right? And so you feel sort of unrestrained of being like shoot them out, like load them off into buses and literally
just kick them over the border and we're good.
Have the bus have a hydraulic lift and like dump them out or something, like right in the middle of the desert.
I've heard them say things like that. So I have a lot of Hispanic conservative friends, and I mean they will talk like that. Like when the whole issue of the Dreamers came up, like I said, oh, how do you feel about this idea of people that were brought here before they even knew like their own names and blah blah blah? Get them out, all of them, every last one of them. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But back to the original subject. And I know Jared Taylor also would agree with you on the idea of whites and Jews that are European of background. So I know the opinion is out there for sure. But the idea is that because I think that ethno-nationalism has its place, and I think that it can be a very positive thing. I think that Israel on the whole has been positive for Jewish people, even though it's been a very controversial subject. I think it's been positive in that they show that Jews can live as a cohesive society, free of outside pressure to an extent. You know what I'm saying?
There's also, I don't think the Jews in Israel, let me put it this way. The Jews in Israel can live in a cohesive society. I don't know if Jews worldwide can. I don't know if you know that, because I actually did excuse me, I did not do this. There was actually a guy, funny enough, you should mention Jared Taylor, because there was a guy who wrote he spent a lot of time looking at Jews and their political views around the world and throughout time. And what he found is that basically like the real shit-lived Jews is like, it's a very American phenomenon. Like Jews in Europe have actually been more voting in favor of like the nativist parties than the general population. And of course, Jews in Israel are more nativist than even that. I mean, there's obviously a real nasty shit lib contingent within the state of Israel that a lot of people don't realize. But so he actually wrote that, and he was going to try to get it published at American Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
But then what happened is the Trump election happened, and we started writing all about Trump election. That kind of got put on the back burner. Then this guy got hired by Jared Taylor, so he actually works for Jared Taylor.
Oh wow!
And so and he was actually going to get that published at American Renaissance, but then like just what happened is like basically a whole bunch of other stuff happened. He started working on a whole bunch of other projects that American Renaissance had in the pipeline, and the document. And then another problem is that he basically hadn't been working on the document for so long that it's like when you do a really big research paper, it's not just that you have all the research there. You like if you step away from it, you start to forget all the stuff, and so to add to it and boot it up again, it's not like, oh, you just jump right into it. He has to sort of relearn all the stuff that he knows, and so it just never sort of.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but I actually did post it on one of my videos to a guy, Kraut T, on the political views of Jews. And basically, the hell of it is, I saw your debate with Mike Enoch, and I will say a few things that I kind of disagree with your idea that he's a faker.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have been, like, let me put it this way. I have been close to, I guess, I don't know, close to Mike on the internet all the way back to the ANCAP days.
Okay.
And basically he and I moved away from anarcho-capitalism sort of at the same time and stuff. And so now he became very anti-Jewish. And one thing about him is that he has sort of he grew up in New York City, which is basically which I'm going to be frank here and blunt, New York City, which is ground zero of shitty Jews. So,
well, it's funny. He didn't actually grow up in New York City. He grew up 10 minutes from me in New Jersey.
Oh, mm-hmm. Well, okay.
Which also has a very large kind of cosmopolitan Jewish population. But yeah, I'm just saying it's funny because me and him actually probably could. I think he's around my age as well. So it's likely that we could have met at some point growing up.
Right. Well, I would just say that I disagree with your conception that God damn it. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I would disagree with your conception that he but the thing is your argument wasn't exactly that he doesn't believe it, but sort of that I get it. It's a complicated thing. It's like, how to put it this way. It's not like, because there's believing something, and then there's sort of choosing to be ignorant about things, and like you choose to be ignorant about something in order to preserve your beliefs, but you kind of know you're doing it. It's complicated. It's complicated psychology, what people do to sort of preserve.
Oh, you know what's really funny is now that you mentioned that, right after our debate, right, he went on Luke Ford's stream. Luke's an Orthodox Jew. He's a convert Orthodox Jew, but he's very sympathetic to alt-right views. Let's say that on the whole.
Sure.
Right? Sure. So as he was talking, he said something like, I think all the time, if I hadn't gotten doxxed or Trump, no, he said, if Trump hadn't got elected and the left didn't go nuts and decide that they were going to come after me and, expose my wife, expose all of this, would I still be kind of doing my thing, but still in my apartment in New York? Would I still be married and all of that? And he said it with a pretty high level of sadness. Like, now that I've chosen this life, I don't really have much of a choice, was the way he kind of said it. Right. And my premise has been with him, and yes, I was very hostile to him. I'm still pretty hostile to him. But my premise with him has been not that I think he's a fraud in that he wakes up in the morning and, he doesn't think about Jews at all and then goes out and goes Hail Hitler on people just because he wants to, make money or anything like that. I don't think he's a fraud like that. What I think he's a fraud on is that he doesn't have any real plan. He has a lot of complaints and he likes to point out those complaints, but he doesn't really have any idea of what those complaints mean or how to conceptualize them into a plan of action.
Okay. So I would, to be I'm gonna sort of be his advocate here.
Please, I'm fine with that.
Have you you listened to Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert?
Hmm.
He talks about, like, one thing he says that really stuck with me is he said goals are for losers. Now, what he means by that, he doesn't mean working hard is for losers, or sticking to a plan is for losers. What he means is being really fixated on this is how X, Y, or Z is going to happen is sort of a short-sighted thing.
So let me clarify then, because I happen to agree with you completely on that. When we started the debate, he had mentioned a lawsuit against it, right? And he
Sure,
was
sure.
talking about wanting to, like, it was kind of like raise awareness that we hope that this suit gets dismissed, but there's nothing you can do for that. That's just on the judge whether he's going to dismiss
Sure.
it. There's nothing anyone can do about that.
Right,
And
right.
I said, but if he's not going to dismiss it, you should look at this as an opportunity. Because if they can subpoena stuff from you, you can subpoena stuff from them. Like,
Yeah, I think you're overestimating the resources and legal knowledge that he has. It's a very asymmetric fight. He doesn't have the same knowledge of the legal system that are people going against him, and he can't hire. He doesn't have the money to hire like really high priced people. So I think it's
I would probably, I mean, while I agree with you on that, on his legal knowledge, I would probably say that he would be able to find either a free speech advocate, or B, a white nationalist lawyer who would take it pro bono. But that's neither here nor there. The issue being was that every time I challenged him as to what the complaint he was making meant, or suggested, well, why wouldn't you try this or try that, there was always an excuse as to why he couldn't. You know, like I said, like, look at the Free State
okay.
Project, which has had
I
some level of success.
yeah,
You know,
it has. I would say I don't want to go down any further into Mike stuff. I'm sort of getting uncomfortable because I don't
no,
because
that's
I
fine. That's totally fine.
because I have things that I could defend, but then I would be sort of putting motives into Mike's mind, and I don't want to do that. So
Which I wouldn't ask you to do. Also,
I want to kind of derail from there, and I want to talk about I want to go way back to what you're talking about, sort of the actual functionality of white ethno states, sort of immediately right now. I said that was those Eastern European Visegrad group countries, but I'm sort of, what I talk about a lot is something more longer term, is sort of creation of the white ethno state. And hold on, that is something. Now the thing is, I don't like the term ethno state, but the thing is, it got popularized because Richard Spencer used it a lot. So that's.
it's also easy to argue against. So it did get popularized because it's an easy target.
Yeah,
So,
that's a major, yeah. But anyway, but I use that term in my video because clickbait, and I want people to watch it. So, and whatever. So that's that. That's why I use that word.
that's fine. No, that's fine. I get that.
But the way, I don't know. Did you watch my? Did you watch that video? The
Yes.
White Ethno State video. Oh, okay. So you know that it's actually kind of like, it would be kind of like Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The establishment of Israel is that you basically have a bunch of people in an area. The Palestinians aren't necessarily kicked out, but they're but you know, it's just sort of like, okay, this is sort of a white state. Anyone else who's here can be here. But and the thing is, it's not necessarily that the white ethno state is 100% white. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to be a place where people of European ancestry can go to, like, wherever. It's sort of like the home base. You know, like for example, in the white ethno state, all those white South Africans would be come on in straight away, like right away.
I mean, I don't know why we're not doing that already, but I hear you.
Yeah. Well, we're not doing it. We're not doing that already because the United States is not a white ethno state, and neither is Denmark. Even though Denmark is like 96-7% white, Denmark's not doing that, and Denmark's not taking in any, because Denmark is, you know, it's a European country that happens to be very, very white. It's not, you know, it's not the ethno state though.
For sure.
And the thing, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland, I think as long as Orban is in power, Hungary is the closest thing to that, because there's a lot of dissidents who have moved to Hungary and are basically like white advocates, dissidents. Ramsey Paul and Ramsey Paul and someone else who's pretty big. I don't want to say, okay. But there's other people who are pretty big, and I don't really want to say. I don't think it would hurt them if I said it, but there's no reason to say it. Um, and they're like all in Hungary as well, and Hungary welcomes them. The problem is Hungary is not a very huge country, so it can't,
Right.
you
It
know,
also doesn't
can't
have a lot of resources. It doesn't have a lot of industry, so it is very
exactly.
limited in what it could accomplish.
Correct. Where but combine Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland, now you're talking a little bit. But
Hmm.
so but in the future, like carving something out of the United States, sort of that area, um, yeah, I see it as very similar to Israel. And one thing I sort of in your argument with Mike on the state of Israel, like my view on that is now the thing is maybe I have sort of a biased view, but I basically agree with you on the state of Israel and the policy to the Palestinians. And frankly, like people talk about Palestinian right to return. Like
Hmm.
and first off, Palestinian is like a term. It's just Arab in that region. It's not there are no Palestinian people. That's a mythical.
They openly said that themselves before 1967, that the only reason the term Palestinian was created was to destroy Israel, that they're part of Greater Syria.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
I can send you sources. Like that's what their leaders openly said when the term was created.
Right. So but the funny thing is, like, I look at sort of the establishment. No, the my ideal sort of way to establish the white ethnic state is kind of like Israel. But the problem when I say that is like, is that necessary? Is that necessarily good from a PR standpoint, given how much a lot of people don't like the state of Israel?
Yeah, you see, I agree with that.
So it's sort of like
the reason I had asked you for this stream and that I wanted to pick your brain is this, is as I said, I think that ethno-nationalism has its place. And I also see that right now we are facing a unified left. They are marching the road to Marxism, and Islam is aiding in that because they think their level of Marxism is awesome too. And I think that a lot of our best foot soldiers, the people who could be out there advocating for the principles of a right society, a right-leaning society, are being tied up in minutia or tied up in details that won't make any kind of change whatsoever. And I would like to see a way that whites can advocate for whites, Jews can advocate for Jews in a way that isn't against others, but is more centered in societal belief that this can be a good thing, that ethno-nationalism has its place.
yeah. Well, I'll say this. Well, I mean, right now, sort of like ask a question like, "What are you doing? What is your plan?" Like, the way I look at it is like sort of agitate. Let me put it this way: the Scottish National Party.
Mm-hmm.
The Scottish National Party. Now the politics of the Scottish National Party are atrocious in my view, but in terms of their political strategy, the Scottish National Party is a separatist party. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They want Scotland to separate from the rest of the UK. Now they did not. Now, and the thing is, they've been doing a lot of political activism to that end. Then they had the referendum and they failed.
Mm-hmm.
They failed, but the Scottish National Party still dominates Scotland, still has a big say in England. So the thing is, working on the road, like doing things with the ultimate goal down the line for separatism, you're still going to gain a lot of political power and you're going to change a lot of minds on the way there. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about like this white ethno state, people will go, "That's great. That'll never happen." Maybe, but first off, maybe it will. I mean, who knows? Who'd have thunk that the Soviet Union was going to pop off when it did? But also on the road to doing that, you're convincing people of a whole bunch of other stuff. You're convincing white people to sort of think in their own interests and vote in their own interests and get people in a whole bunch of states that don't have a lot of people, but each have 2 senators to start mm-hmm. to act in their own interests. And that's a win in and of itself, right? Like basically every step of the way is a win. Every step of the way would be progress. So even if like the ultimate goal is in fact a pipe dream, which people say that with a degree of confidence that I think reflects an ignorance of the broader march of history. Even if that is a pipe dream,
I think it's not a pipe dream. I don't think it could be accomplished without violence. So,
Well, the violence would not be on our initiation.
no, but that's my point. Like, I'm
Let's
not
say
saying
that.
that, I'm not even saying that bringing about a state using violence is inherently a bad thing. If you're talking about the protection of your own people, whether it be by race, whether it be by philosophy or anything, sometimes the use of violence, especially if used against you, becomes necessary. I mean, there's casus belli for war all the time, and no
Sure.
one would argue about it. But what I think about is that, yes, the idea of the white ethno state, especially in all of America, is kind of a pipe dream, non-violently. But I would like to see a way that people could advocate for white rights and to advocate for whiteness in a way that doesn't reflect the ideas of the people like I've been debating. I won't even care about their names, where it becomes, oh, well, the Jews control the country, or the blacks are so violent we have to separate, or the Hispanics are taking over through illegal immigration, or the Muslims are blowing people up. Like, by always pointing out that the others are a threat, you're never advocating for what makes your own society a better alternative, other than by default, it's not as bad as what you're pointing out.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
and I know you've done a lot of research into this. That's the reason why I'm asking. Is I know you've researched heavily, like the genetic
research into what in particular?
The idea of cohesive societies that are based on genetics.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people have done research into that. I think that's something that's like that's something I think that most people, that like every researcher who researches that actually knows, and some academics like to make stuff up that's not the case, but I think they're consciously lying when they say that. So that's not anything particular to me. That's something a lot of people say. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm trying to understand what you're like. I think what you're saying is there needs to be a more positive kind of.
What I'm saying is that I believe that the goals of the vast majority of white nationalists, of people who want to protect their people from either multiculturalism, violence, or as a Jewish person, like out marrying is an issue also. You know, so I want to be able to give people more of a basis, and I like to hear competing views. I like to hear differing views, especially heavily researched views, on how those things can be presented to people without just having to hate others. You know what I'm saying? Without having to point out the shortfalls of others, and how to make it a positive thing and show that it has a basis in reality, it has a basis in research, it has a basis in science, in philosophy, that can be accomplished.
Yeah. One thing, well, here's a bit of a, I would say my issue with that is that the very premise that you're operating on is different from the premise I'm operating on, because I don't think and the problem is the term white nationalism should be a fine term. Like, I should be able to say, oh, white nationalism. Yeah. What Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson thought. Yeah. White. No, but when people say white nationalism, they think of Ku Kluxes and Hitlerbergs and stuff. So that's, thanks to those guys. But, but the way I see it is, for white people, if they have the permission to be, to use a term that from Mike that I actually like, to take your own side. I think that's actually a very good term. Mm-hmm. If they have their permission to do that, about 80% of them will do that. Why 80%? I don't know. It's not a scientific number. It's just sort of my kind of experience and my, I think it's 80%. It's also a nice round number. So but anyway, I think that a sizable majority of white people will become what we call white nationalists, in the traditional sense, in the sense that Theodore Roosevelt was a white nationalist.
Right.
So and because of that, what I do is I try to do things to break down barriers to what I see as kind of a default white nationalism. Is basically, how do I reset people, or excuse me, reset whites on this? Because that's what all my videos are targeted at. It's targeted at whites. And so what I look at is what are the barriers, and the barriers are the oppression narrative, and one of the things that the oppression narrative is reliant on is sort of genetic equality in stuff, because if racial groups, if these racial groups are all like there could be like if any difference between any racial group could be a result of genetic differences, or partly or entirely, or in fact it's the heritability of a trait is over 100%, which would mean that if the environments were equal, the gaps would be even bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
That basically means all bets are off for anything in the oppression narrative, right? Say, oh, black people, they're poorer, and that's why they're more criminal, and all this stuff. Say, well, does poverty actually have crime? When you break all that stuff down, what it does is it breaks down the oppression narrative, and it breaks down the idea of equality, and equality is what's needed for the oppression narrative. And once you break down the oppression narrative, I operate on the assumption that leads to a kind of default white nationalism. And the reason I operate on that assumption is because that's kind of what happened with me. That's what happened with Mike. That's what happened with Sean. That's also what happened with this guy who's now working at Ameren. That's basically what happened with all of us. So what I'm trying to do is I'm sort of trying to recreate that. And is that necessarily the best way to do it? I don't know. I mean, there been any research on how to persuade people to become white nationalists. But that's sort of my point of view. And so I don't see, so presenting sort of a positive case, I'm not against that, but I think the main issue is breaking down the barriers to a default, which is where I am now. I believe where I am now is sort of the default.
Because I mean, one of the reasons why I'd also wanted to hear your opinion is I've been very forceful about this, that people who think generationally are going to be more successful than people that don't, whether for good or for bad. Muslims think generationally, but they think in terms of conquering. So they're willing to sacrifice their children now for the greater good later. So that's definitely not a good thing. But like me personally, I see it as I would rather not argue with the Mike Enochs and the Nick Fuentes and all that. But at the same time, I have children, and I would rather be spending my time with my children, not thinking about people out there fighting a JQ that I think is boogeymen, or people like I have an upcoming debate with Ryan Dawson about Israel, where I have to worry about people advocating for like the destruction of a whole state because they don't like it. Right. And I see it as that if white people would start breeding again, or they would start thinking generationally in terms of the next generation, in terms of their own kids, not just in terms of their own race, I would think that they would be able to come up with constructive solutions that would better whiteness in a good way for them as well as for a person like me.
One thing I want to point out, though, and I'm not sure if you're thinking this way, but in terms of electoral numbers, the white fertility rate is actually not that dire.
Really? I haven't heard that before, so I'm curious as to.
Well, it's not. Well, the overall number is what it is, and so you could say that's really bad. However, I actually did this. I actually have an article entitled "The Republican Path to Victory," where basically Republicans are like right at replacement level. Mm-hmm. And so that low white fertility rate, that's basically a product of liberals not having kids. So sure, whites aren't having kids, but in terms of a voting context, it's not so dire. And we're actually already seeing the effects from Gen Z. Now the millennials are horrible. The millennials are terrible. Like something happened with, I think the millennials was sort of the mid to late 90s. That was like sort of the perfect storm of, for whatever reason, I don't know how to break that down, but it's sort of the perfect storm of becoming shit libs. However, the genetics are such that like, and of course this is something I believe, which is the heritability of political views or at least political tendencies. Mm-hmm. So the whites are actually getting more and more conservative, and that's also going to result in politics in the U.S. becoming more clearly racial, more so than they are even now. And also in the particular states where whites have low fertility, California, New York, um, basically California, New York, and I think New Jersey, possibly Virginia. These are like lost causes. Like
Hmm.
these are lost cause states to where lower white fertility is not going to matter that much. White fertility, I think, is a little bit low. I believe in Ohio, that's bad. That's bad news. However, in Texas, white fertility is very high.
But you look
Um,
at like the correlation, you look at Europe, right? And the majority of Europe's leaders are childless, right?
right.
It's actually,
Well, good, good,
I'm
good.
not, yeah, I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that I believe that them being childless produces the type of policies that they are. Like one might a chicken egg argument,
Produces short-sighted thinking. Yeah.
right? And in when I say I debate the leaders of the alt right because I think a lot of them are frauds, I think a lot of that comes into play as well, in that most of them are childless or at least have no part in their children's lives. And the ones that do seem to
Well,
be
one thing to consider with on that, let me just tell you this. If I was in fact married and had two children, I would not tell anyone on the internet that. Okay? So
you know what? Fair enough. I totally understand.
that
Yeah.
is one thing. That is one thing to consider. Also, um, you know, well, I'll just leave it there. I'll just say some like there's people, the alt right leaders that you talk to who may have a relation and may be planning to have children right now. So
Okay.
just
Fair
consider.
enough. It's more the idea that I feel like that so many on the alt right seem to have a very like nice basis in genetic knowledge, in scientific knowledge, in biologic knowledge. And this is something that I actually give alt right leaders credit for, is that when they do discover knowledge, they tend to really push it. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? But I think that without the practice of passing on those genetics and being able to be able to nurture and able to kind of train the next generation of soldiers, I think they lose sight of the end goal, which is why I wanted to ask you about end goals and how those type of the type of research that you've done can actually be beneficial to achieving those end goals. You know, I mean, New Jersey probably has a decent fertility rate because they take my family into account, and that throws off the numbers.
Right.
But you know, but I have 5 kids, so
Right.
it's but at the same time, like I've really enjoyed this talk with you. And as before, you said right before we went live, you said, what's this debate about? And I said, oh no, I wasn't looking for a debate.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am hostile to certain people, but I really was interested in picking your brain on
Yeah.
these things.
Yeah. You know what was funny though? When I invited you on, I was actually like, the thing is, here's what I decided to do coming into this, because I saw what happened with Mike and I saw what happened with Nick, and I was thinking that you're going to try to do that with me. But then I was thinking, well, I'm not Mike or Nick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Halsey's not going to be so hostile. So I was actually so I basically said, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend the first 2 minutes to figure out what this Halsey guy is going to do, and then I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to respond based on that. So I was actually prepared to
Go to war.
I was prepared to filibuster and talk over you and keep talking, keep saying, and just keep the space open and just keep talking. Even if I didn't have anything to say, keep talking over you, try to filibuster, say, hey, shut up, or I'm going to mute you. Hey, shut up, Meatloaf. I'm going to, stuff like that. So I was ready for that actually coming into this, but I didn't. But you have actually been. Well, actually, I didn't know exactly what to expect. So we're going off track here. I guess one thing I sort of wanted to bring up to you,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not something that's at all actionable. And I think sort of you might be at an age where you're not that interested in a lot of theoretical stuff. But regarding the state of Israel, I had read in the past that there were proposals for the state of Israel to have the state of Israel in somewhere in Brazil,
Brazil and Madagascar.
and Madagascar,
Mm-hmm.
and also in Tanzania.
Yep.
Yeah. So there were 3 locations, and so my thought about that. Now, obviously, Tanzania and Madagascar, you're going to have issues with the people there. But I thought, like, my view was that why that the Israelis would be in a much better situation today if they bought some land from Brazil, from the Brazilian government, because they would have more land, and they would be sort of, I believe it was somewhere, it was not at the mouth of the Amazon, but it was just right next to the mouth of the Amazon, which is on the coast, but it's the north coast, and it's very sparsely populated. And I think the Jews would have been a lot better off had they taken that deal, as opposed to taking a much smaller amount of land surrounded by people more hostile to them.
So there's so much that I can address just to give you the knowledge on those things.
Okay.
When Zionism first started, it was a European movement. It wasn't a worldwide Jewish movement. In fact, it took a while to get to the United States. It didn't really affect any of the Jews in Arab lands or anything like that. So when they were talking about a Jewish state, there was no religious connection to Israel. They weren't thinking like, oh, well, we want to be there because that's where we've dreamed of being for 2,000 years or anything like that. There was none of that going on. So the proposals that were on the table were, let's buy land where we can and let's do it that way. The thing was, Jews had already started immigrating to Israel, to where Israel is located now. And they weren't Zionists. They weren't part of a Zionist movement. They weren't part of any kind of political Zionism at all. They were part of small communal settlements. And as they were growing, there were also already tons of religious Jews that were already in that land as well.
Wait, hold on. What years were these?
We're talking about the early 1800s.
Okay, so that's the Ottoman Empire, I think.
Yeah, they were buying land from the Ottoman Empire.
And the Ottoman Empire.
When you hear Jews say they came to the desert and they made it home.
The Ottoman Empire. Wait, the Ottoman Empire sold Jews a bunch of land?
Absolutely. They sold them the most malarial, disgusting swamps that you could ever find in the land. And that's why they say the Jews came to the land and made the desert bloom, because the land they got was so gross. And then they came there and they used Australian eucalyptus trees to drain the swamps, and the soil underneath swamps is incredibly fertile. So they used it and built communal farms, huge communal farms. And there was actually 4 waves. They call them.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised that the Ottomans sold a bunch of Jews land, but okay.
The area of Palestine, which encompasses Jordan and Israel, were almost uninhabited and were completely neglected by the Ottomans. They didn't care at all about that area.
Yeah, I know that it was very sparsely populated, but I was just shocked that a bunch of
Muslims, they were willing to pay quite a bit of money for this crappy land in the middle of nowhere. The Ottomans thought they really got the best end of it.
Well, and also the Ottomans were not in a financially very good situation for a very long time. They were kind of a weak empire, but anyway.
Right, but as first of all, like you said, they settled for a very small piece of land. The original British mandate for Palestine that was to be given to the Jews, according to the Balfour Declaration, as I said, encompassed all of Jordan and all of the land currently known as Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Right. So it was a huge piece of land. That was trimmed down over years to appease different levels of Arabs. And also they brought in the Hashemite kingdom from Saudi Arabia to populate Jordan and make the country of Jordan. Right. So it wasn't, Jordan is, if you look at like what the Arabs that are there, they're Palestinians in that they were there in that area to begin with. But the leaders of Jordan are Hashemites. They're actually not native to that area.
I wonder if the Brazilian government would still sell a bunch of land. Probably not.
Probably not, because borders have become a thing nowadays, which they never really were. Like most people say, oh, well, Israel came and established, this country, and there were all these Arabs there, and there were all these countries there. None of those countries were there for 40 years. Yeah. Like, I mean, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all those things, those borders were drawn less than 10 years before Israel declared its state. So, and now we put an emphasis on those borders beyond any type of logic or reason that could ever be imagined. I mean, Iraq is 3 distinct areas of 3 distinct people. Yeah, and yet
those borders make sense if you sort of you look at the borders of European countries and say, oh, those are pretty important, those are meaningful, and so you kind of assume that they're meaningful everywhere else. Right? Mm-hmm. So,
exactly.
It's just people don't know. They just don't know.
But by the time it came to whether they would accept an area of, say, like in Africa or in South America, there was no support amongst anything but a small portion of European Jewry at the time. So it would have literally been like a small settlement that probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. If anything, they would have just molded into whatever culture like was the closest around.
They would have just become Brazilians, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So at the time, in order to make sure that they had the highest concentration of people and the broadest spectrum of support, they chose the area where there already were a lot of Jews when Zionism started to actually become a thing.
Right.
So that's why they didn't accept those ideas. Those were ideas that were fomented at Zionist Congress from Theodore Herzl when he first started the movement.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to read a little to read about that. I have no idea what the chat has to say about this discussion.
Because the chats on my streams tend to be complete dumpster fires, I tend to ignore them pretty much, because otherwise I'm just going to focus on everybody saying they want to gas me or kill me or kill my family or things like that, and I don't have any use for it. But there was something I did notice in the chat before that I do want to address. Someone said that I was talking about Jews, and in light of what happened at Count Dankula today. If anyone's following my Twitter or following the things that I've said or the streams that I've gone on today, like Dankula is a friend. Like I'm been on the forefront of pushing that he should be out. I even called out the Scottish Jewish Council, which basically had nothing to do with him getting arrested, and said, why are they not out there saying this is nothing? This detracts from real people who deny the Holocaust or anything like that. So I don't know why I would be held responsible for what happened to Dankula when I'm at the front lines of making sure this doesn't happen. Jada Franson was also just in prison there for calling a Muslim rape gang a Muslim rape gang. She's one of my closest friends, so she's a leader of Britain First that was just sentenced to 38 weeks in prison. So I just wanted to address that point in the chat for the people who did talk about it, that pinning it on me or pinning it on the Jewish community is really not appropriate on this one.
Right. So one thing I would I've been sort of thinking about, like regarding like one thing that a lot of people will talk about. They'll talk about Jewish influence in the media. Because one thing, because I was actually like had a conversation with some TRS people, and one thing I would say is like, look, guys, there's like a whole segment of the population that really hates the Republican Party establishment. They really hate the media. They really hate the fire sector, right? Finance, insurance, and real estate. They really hate sort of that what they consider like a vampire financial sector of the economy. Like they really hate all of these things, right? They hate like the controllers of social media and the people who happen to have gotten in on the ground floor of like a natural monopoly of social media, and so it's like so they hate all of these groups of people, and they're willing to work against these groups of people. It's like, what is the point of saying, oh, here, guess what? They're disproportionately Jewish. It's like, what's the point of that? Like, why would you do that? Like, they're already against like everything that's, and the thing is like, they'll say, well, first off, like 30% of Jews are pro-Trump. Like they say it's Naxalt, but it's true. Okay. First of all. And second of all, it's like, the real problem is, people talk about why are Jews bad? They'll talk about these sorts of things, but it's like, but the thing is, you already have mobilized opposition to those things. Even like, here's another thing. Even if it was like all Jews, even if all Jews were like, even if every single Jew was like Bill Kristol, even if every single Jew was like Tim Wise, there's no point because people are already mobilized against those kinds of people. So I don't think there's any. So that's sort of been my line, is that there's no point in naming the Jew, which is something.
Because if you look at it, by the highest estimates I've seen, and I'm not even sure that I believe it's this high, 32% of the media is made up of Jews. So what you're saying is that
there's a problem. You sort of have to define, because I doubt 32% of the cameramen are Jews.
No, obviously not.
It's up at a certain rank or something.
Okay, so I mean, however you want to define it, like that's the kind of number I've seen. If you wanted to go even higher, I wouldn't even care. Sure. It's the point being is that there's still 68% that are not Jewish that are pushing the same narrative, and I would argue that the Jews that are pushing what they're pushing are just pushing as much of an anti-Jewish narrative as they are an anti-white narrative, to push for like basically Islamic blasphemy laws, and like
that's
the destruction of the family, and the destruction of marriage as an institution, and the destruction of religion. These are not in any measurable sense in the Jewish interest. No. So the Jews that aren't in on the extreme left wing of the spectrum look at them just as enemy like as any white person would. And the problem is that when you define them and say, well, they have an overrepresentation, therefore, is you force people who see them as an enemy to come to some level of defense, because they have to say, well, if you're just saying Jews are controlling the world in order to hurt white people, I know I'm not, so therefore I have to come to some level of defense of these cretins that push these horrible policies
that are
and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and
I think one issue maybe is that there's not. Yeah, and that was something that paper was gonna show, and I actually published it on a video. I think I'll send it to you in sort of incomplete form. Was supposed to show is just kind of like demystify Jews, because they're so like, yeah, I think because there's such a lack of knowledge about like the numbers that we're looking at here. Like people, for example, know that blacks 90% vote Democrat. The 85 IQ numbers, like they kind of know what blacks are. The thing is, a lot of people, they don't know exactly what Jews are, basically. And so so what a lot of people will do is they'll sort of, when they think about Jews, like if there's like a lot of shitty people in media and in politics, and then one thing that happens is they start to become like aware and say, oh, this person's a Jew, this person's a Jew, this person's a Jew. Wow, that's a lot more than 2% of the shitty people, and then and as opposed to like, okay, but this is just like, this is like in like ground zero of like the worst of the worst. Like for example, like if you was like, hey, what are the political views of white people generally? Oh, I'll go to, the Berkeley campus, Cal State Berkeley in San Francisco, and I'll figure out what white people think, right? That's kind of, I think, what's happening, because when people think about Jews, they're thinking about media elites, they're thinking about New York City, right?
Like I had someone who went at me the other day. I think I told you I hang out in a lot of different alt-right Discord servers and all of that, and I just do it because I like to talk, and I honestly do like to find solutions. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people will say, yeah, but Jews run the banks. And I'm like, of the top 10 banks in America, one is run by a Jew, one is run by a Greek, the rest are all Irish.
What, Irish?
Yeah, there's 8 Irish, 1 Greek, and 1 Jew.
Well, one Jew, that's still overrepresentation. That's 10%.
Yeah,
but that fucking Irish over, that's like, geez, around. Man.
Well, that makes me evil anyway, because I'm half Irish and I'm half Jewish. So genetically, exactly. So I run everything.
What's that meme like around? Like prepare around mix, prepare for tricks or something.
Yeah, something like.
Yes. So there we go. The fucking.
But I think that there's so much common ground in order for people to see that if the right in itself doesn't unify in some way. And there's a great article, I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's been like, millions of views since the election. It was written by a very anti-Trump guy, and it was called You're Still Crying Wolf. And it was talking about the people that are calling Trump a Nazi and trying to prove that he's this ridiculous racist and all of that. Right. And he breaks down all of the numbers. And the reason he does it is to say, listen, there are so many reasons you could say Trump is horrible, but to say he's a racist is actually a stupid one. And they said that amongst the general population, and he did separate out Jews as part of this, Trump gained in every single demographic except white people. He actually lost support from Obama amongst white people. It's weird. I'm telling you. I'll send you the article. It's.
Because the thing is, I've compared exit polls between 2012 and 2016, and Trump's numbers were higher amongst the. Well, it maybe depend on what you're doing, because what I did is I basically looked at percentage voted for Trump versus percentage voted for Hillary, and then percentage voted for Romney versus percentage voted for Obama, and then I excluded any third party support. And what I found is that Trump got like 62% of the white vote between the two real candidates. And
so that's, I think, the number he came to as well, if I'm not
mistaken. And I think Romney got, I'm pretty sure Romney got less than that. It's been a while since I looked at the data. Romney may have gotten more, but Romney may have gotten like a higher percentage in the total, simply because there weren't any third-party candidates back then, or it wasn't significant like it was in 2016. Right. I think that may be what you're looking at in terms of Trump supposedly losing support. But Trump gaining on. First off, Trump wasn't running against Obama. He was running against a much weaker candidate, Hillary.
Oh, for sure.
So that was like, that was a really important thing, is why he won. And also, I think he's going to win again. One thing that I did during the election is I did something that was interesting. I did what we call unskewing, where you control for party ID. And what was very interesting is that like in August of that year, my unskewing resulted in massively different results. But as you got closer to the election, all the media polls started to have samples that were in line with Gallup and Pew's party ID representation of the general public. So it was funny, as you got closer and closer to the election, the media polls started to behave themselves, and my corrections started to have no effect. And once we got into late October, I just stopped, because my results were no different than the polling results. So basically, what was funny is I basically saw, like, at a rate of like 1 day per day, the media fucking around with the samples, but as they got closer to the election, they said, we don't want to burn our credibility. They started to behave themselves, and you heard this meme, oh, the race is tightening, which it wasn't tightening. It was always that close. It's just that the polls started to behave themselves, and they didn't want to burn themselves by being wrong, or at least not totally wrong. And they actually got the popular vote pretty close to right. One thing I did, and this is something that a lot of people didn't do during the election, is I actually did an analysis looking at primary turnout. Because one thing, I don't know if you saw 538. 538 had a blog post where they said primary turnout doesn't matter, and their analysis of it was retarded. Like, they basically, what they did is they say, oh, was there an increase in primary turnout? Did the candidate win? It was this weird binary either or analysis of like specific elections, and it was just dumb. It's like, just do a regression with all the data. Just take all the data from all the years you can find, run a regression, and see if there's any correlation. And we did. We found there was a very good correlation. It was like 0.3, and you could say that's a weak correlation. But look, buddy, that means a 1 standard deviation increase in primary turnout is going to result in a 0.3 standard deviation in general election turnout. That's huge. That's good. And the thing is, we were looking at the primary turnout in all these states, and guess what we found? Massive increases in primary turnout in West Virginia, but who cares? West Virginia's, not in play at all. But basically, the highest increase in primary turnout was in West Virginia, but then it radiated out, of West Virginia. So West Virginia was sort of like the bomb, but then it radiated out into Pennsylvania, and then Ohio, and then in Michigan to a lesser extent, and then Wisconsin a little bit to a lesser extent. And so I was looking at this now, and sort of as the election went on, I actually made predictions that Trump was going to win because he was going to win Pennsylvania. And so I was like, oh, and then when it actually happened, I was so vindicated. And for Michigan, I said Michigan, I put in my model, and basically Michigan, it was like 0. It was like total, like no, like there was no, like, my model said Michigan would be a total toss-up. And the thing is, I looked at the data, and I actually chickened out when I made my predictions, when I made my public predictions. I didn't predict Trump to win Michigan, because I just thought, because I was looking at my model said dead heat, but now I was just like, but it's Michigan. Michigan always votes Democrat. It's like Detroit, Uniontown. Like, what the fuck? Michigan always votes Democrat. But I was looking at my model. I was like, no. It's like, And so I basically sissied out in not calling Michigan a dead heat. But I did call Pennsylvania. So that's why.
This is one of those ones, and usually I'm pretty good, but this one I got completely wrong. I tuned in election night to just basically, watch him lose. And I was on the Trump train from day one. Like, there was no point where I didn't want Donald Trump to win. So, to me, the greatest threat to democracy is entrenched power, and Trump was the greatest threat to entrenched power that's come to our country since Reagan, but Reagan wasn't even comparable, you
Right.
know. And it's funny because I was just telling this story today that when I was in college, I was at an event in D.C. because I interned for Congress, and I found myself talking to Geraldine Ferraro, who no one really remembers who that is. I'm not that old, but she was the vice presidential candidate in the
Yeah.
Democratic Party that challenged Reagan for re-election.
Yeah, I've heard that name a lot, but I don't know who that is. Anyway, go.
Yeah, she was like the first female vice presidential candidate. She ran against Reagan for when he ran for re-election, and they lost 49 out of 50 states.
Yeah.
And I found out myself talking to her for some odd reason at this reception, and I said to her, I said, I'm really into politics. I really love hearing like stories I won't read somewhere. So what's like the one thing you learned about the election that I won't read in like any book that you've written or anything like that? And she said, after the election, we went to Wisconsin. I think it was Wisconsin, and we were at a union rally, and we were just thanking people and all of that. And I said to all of them, I said, we support all of your policies. We are the union party. Like everything the unions ever asked for, we do. We're your people. Why didn't you vote for us? Why did you turn out for him? And they said, he makes us more proud. And I thought that could be Trump's in. And I still think it'll be his in 2020.
Well, I think in 2020, he's definitely going to win because I did some like for the approval rating.
Mm-hmm.
I think you look at a lot of polls, it's like 42, 43%. I did a little bit of my like unskewing, which is like a dirty word, but I think I can use it because I so correctly predicted this election like very well. So I believe I sort of have a right to unskew at least until I fuck up in 2020. I'll have that right. But like with my unskewing, I have the approval rating for Trump is at like 47% right now. I think that's the real number. And with that number, with a 47% approval rating, that's game over. Because the Republicans have an electoral advantage with the map because they have all these like no population Western states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. That's 12 votes there and like no people, right? So the Republicans have a huge electoral map advantage,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the Democrat candidate is not going to be like loved. So and also Trump, there's a lot of people in 2016 who were just convinced that Trump was going to like blow up the ocean if he won. And the fact that Trump has been president and bad things have not happened, that's going to be, a lot of those fears are going to be allayed. And I think Trump's like hardcore support is still going to be there. So that's sort of why I think Trump's going to win in 2020 much more easily than he won in 2016. And incumbents tend to win. So
true. And I always use the mom barometer. My mother is center right. But she'll listen to anybody's. My father's to the right of Genghis Khan, so he's, right. Trump's not conservative enough for my father. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying?
Trump's not conservative enough. Well, I don't know if I don't know if I would even call myself right wing. But anyway, go ahead, continue.
But so my mother, like, you can get a barometer for what the middle thinks. By my mother, she's a public school teacher. She's surrounded by lefties. Like a lot of her friends are lefties, and she'll look at me and she'll go, God, they just hate him, but I can't figure out why. And I'm like, that's America. That's what the majority of middle America who will vote, who don't have a preferred party, are going to think in 2020. Like, why do they hate him so much? And things seem to be going pretty well.
Right. Yeah.
And I think Trump wins almost a Reagan-esque victory.
Oh, I don't think that. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's possible nowadays. That to win a Reagan, like 49, like not 49 states, but you're thinking something like
47. If you take out New Jersey, New York, California, you know what? Maybe I'm over exaggerating. Maybe we're talking like 40.
Let's see, California,
Oregon, Washington.
Oregon would be possible. Oregon is not like the realm of impossibility, but I think it's like in terms of like possible for Trump to win, Oregon would be possible, Nevada would be possible, Virginia would be possible, Minnesota definitely possible. In fact, Minnesota is maybe kind of a toss-up. Mm-hmm. But Maryland, not possible. Delaware, not possible. New Jersey, not possible. New York, not possible. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, not possible. Vermont, not possible. New Hampshire and Maine, definitely possible. But I don't.
New Jersey's actually a possibility. I'll call it right now. It's a possibility.
Okay, yeah.
The reason being
is
we just elected a ridiculously socialist governor who already hasn't accomplished much, and the things he does want to accomplish are really not popular. Like he wants to nationalize a bank in New Jersey to be the overseer of all the others and it be state run. He's trying to do a lot of things that are pissing New Jerseyans off, and if he keeps down this track, they might protest vote Trump, and the enthusiasm among the left might be non-existent.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah,
that's the only reason I'm saying he has a shot. If anything changes in that prediction, he won't have the slightest prayer.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, one thing I pointed out. Maybe let me pull up the article where I actually ran the numbers. I did this like right after Trump won. It's on my sites. Pathway to Republican. Yeah. Okay. So this is looking at the fertility rate by group in 2014. Mm-hmm. So we have, okay, actually it's not quite as much as I thought it would be. But basically here, did I send you let me send you the link so you can just go ahead and look at this chart here. It's just the chart that I'm referencing.
Okay.
So foreign-born Hispanics are very high, 2.46, and this is from 2013. Hispanics overall 2.13, but the thing is that's down 0.02 from 1 year over year. So it was 2.15 in 2013, 2.13 in 2014. But native-born Hispanics 1.98, and then we have conservative whites at 1.97. So that's actually a little bit below replacement. I remember it being a little bit above, but I guess not. Republican whites 1.92. Blacks 1.87, whites overall 1.76, Asians 1.72, Democrat whites 1.63, and then liberal whites 1.38, and then Native Americans at the bottom. So Native Americans are really like not long for this world. And also another thing I saw, I don't think I have it in here, but Native Americans, their outbreeding rate is like 40%.
You know, they have the highest rate of human trafficking in the whole entire country as well. I didn't know this. I have a friend who's a Native American advocate, and when she told me, I couldn't believe it, and I looked it up, and it's actually true.
Wow. Yeah. So Native Americans are not long for this world.
No.
But which is kind of sad because I don't really, I view them as like when I look at sort of North America, like I view like Native Americans as being like legitimate because they were here first. Like I don't see them as having a right to the whole continent because it's sort of like. It's sort of like,
it's like saying the descendants of Cain and Abel have the right to half the world each.
Right. It's kind of like, or like saying like, hey, I took a piss in the ocean. Now I own the ocean. It's like, yeah, right. Like there were about 2 million people in North America when the Europeans showed up. It was really small. And the thing is, there's a lot of people in the past who said, oh, there were like 100 million people and like there was a genocide of 100. It's like there's literally no way that's true. Because during the Civil War, like we know how built up the U.S. was during the Civil War. Like there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of evidence of civilization with about 35 million people, like at the time of the Civil War.
Right.
And like the things Europeans showed up, they would go for days when they first arrived at the coast before like some wandering bands of these kind of Asian-faced, brown-skinned Siberian people, saw them, and so it was like no, there weren't. There weren't that many people. But the thing is, like 2 million people in an area, my view is, well, I don't think they deserve like a fucking continent, but they certainly deserve something.
For sure.
And so if I was like king of America, like I would say, all right, here's sort of a set aside that sort of represents, how much they would deserve at the moment the Europeans arrived. Even if like their population dwindles to like 5,000 people, for me, it's like, I don't care.
Right.
They are entitled to, about 2 million people's worth of land, period.
Well, they're finding that the reservation system, which still has like, set asides for Native Americans, they're finding that the only ones who do want to stay on the reservation systems are ones that are so broke that basically it's a social welfare state and they're not very pleasant to live in. Right. So they're finding that most Native Americans want to be Americans, not want to live amongst themselves.
Yes. So basically, like and so it ends up creating like a perverse incentive where like the best ones leave, and of course when they leave they basically sort of associate Native Americanness with shittiness because the shitty ones are the ones who stay on the reservations. So it's
Exactly.
probably has a psychological effect that doesn't. So it's yeah, it's sad.
It really is. I'm coming up on my time. I got to run because I have a weekly show that I have to prepare for. But man, I
All right.
really appreciate this. I thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know exactly how it was going to go. I thought it may be like, you know, I was prepared to like try to filibuster and yell and stuff, but you ended, but you know,
We could do that another day
up,
if you want. I like blood sports too, but Brian Dawson is next. So
all right.
for that one, that's going to be next week.
All right. Well, this was a surprisingly cordial conversation. I'll let you go. See you.
Thank you much. I really appreciate it. Take care, man.